What's up, Inkie peeps? It's Adele from Inkie Quill, and it's time for a bit of a new series. I thought we're coming up to a new year. Let's whip out a new series, and it's something that I mentioned in a previous video, and a lot of you like the sound of it, so I thought we'd roll with it. This series is going to be called INKIELIFT, and so usually in the scrapbooking world there's the term scrap lift, and scrap lift is where you use a scrapbook layout as inspiration to create another scrapbook layout. So usually you'll find something that someone shared online and use the same composition or similar papers and create your own layout. I wanted to change it a little bit, and instead of making a scrapbook page from a scrapbook layout, I wanted to create an art journal spread, which is a little bit different because it's a different size, it's double page, a little bit, I do use kind of different products when I do a scrappy page compared to a art journal page sometimes, and I thought it would be fun to create this series. And then today it's a double process because I'm using this layout on the left, which I do believe I made in the Rainbow Challenge Yourself, I think earlier in the year. I'm using that as my INKIELIFT inspiration, and I'm creating an art journal page, and then I'm also creating a scrapbook page. So we're kind of going from layout to art journal to layout, but they're quite different. They've got some similar color themes, and of course the stars are the star of the show, I guess you could say. So while I've been yakking on, I wanted to make some sort of mixed media background so that I could cut out some star shapes. I grabbed some watercolor paper that I had, and I'm just going to town creating a warm toned yellow, orange and red paper. I'm putting that to the side to dry because it was very wet, and I also was a good girl and changed my water. You don't know the amount of projects that I start and I don't want to change my water, and after I start I just immediately regret it, because when you're working with watercolor, the water is kind of it's a crucial part, and if you're working with murky water, or if you're trying to use yellow and your water is blue, it's going to contaminate it. It's going to give you a bit of cross contamination there. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I'm pretty sure that I have included these stars as part of last month's Patreon printables. If my planning goes correctly, they were part of last month's Patreon printables. If they weren't last month's, they were this month's, but I'm pretty sure they were part of September's. So my tip for creating these watercolor backgrounds is to use watercolor paper, not cardstock, not printer paper. You need the watercolor paper because it's designed to be able to take on so much liquidness. And my other tip is to work with a large flat brush if you can, and to also work fast because you're able to blend the colors a lot easier when the watercolor is still very wet. I also like to spray down my paint palettes before I start using them with just a water sprayer bottle. I find that it kind of wakes the watercolors up a little bit and bumps them out of hibernation mode and makes them get ready to work for you. I've sped this up, of course, very fast because I'm just drawing some stars, and I intentionally went for wonky because when you intentionally go for wonky, then you've got nothing to lose. That's my go-to. So then I grabbed my Uniball Signo Broad Gel Pen, and at this point I hadn't bought replenishing ones, I don't think, and so I was fighting with it off camera, trying to make it work. It was very streaky. There was not much ink left in it, if I'm going to be honest, and so I wish that I had bought spare ones before doing this video, but alas, I didn't. So you've got to work with what you've got. So I'm just doing a variety of dots and dashes and lines, and I've been really enjoying whenever I use like a white outline for something to just leave a tiny smidge of a gap between the white outline and whatever I'm outlining or inlining. What's it called when you outline inside? Is it called an inline? Am I making up words? Is it still an outline? The mind is wandering with baffling ideas. This is baby brain just making me not be able to think of words and get stuck on tangents. All right, so all of the stars are done. I've cut them off camera because it took me quite a long time to cut them out. And as you can see, I have way more stars than I could ever need for one page. That's my biggest tip, is to not do too many stars because you don't realize how many you've done until you actually cut them out and see them all in front of you. And I didn't realize that I had done quite so many. So then I've got a couple of magazine images, and my plan was to do both of these images on the one page, but then when I got them on there, the other girls it didn't really work, and I thought this girl's dress was so pretty and I really wanted to make a bit of a feature of it, so I decided to scrap the other girls for another page, and I do use them in another process video that will be up. I think it's on YouTube early next year. It's already filmed. So then it was time for my background, and I picked quite a plain page because I knew I'd be covering a lot of the page up, and so I didn't want to pick a page that had a lot of flowers or a really beautiful background that I wanted to try and keep a bit of it. I'm also putting some baking paper. That's my best friend when it comes to these junk journals because of the different sized pages. It's very important to slip some sort of baking paper, wax paper underneath your pages if you don't want to get paint on all of the other pages in your book, which I should have learnt a long time ago, and I should have learnt the first time that it happened, but it did take me a bit longer than it probably should have. While I've got my paintbrush out and all of these paint pots open, I am also making a background in my Dilutions creative journal, just so that I've got another background for next time. My little Use It Up journal is getting quite full, so recently I've been reaching for my larger Dilutions journal in the same kind of way and using it as a Use It Up journal, which has been really fun, because of course the page size is a lot bigger than the small Dilutions one, and it gives me a little bit more freedom to use a bit more product and have more, I guess, more room to do several different Use It Up things on one page. So I can use some paint, and then another time I can do a stencil, and then another time the page is so big that I can still fit another stencil on, and so yeah, that's been really good. I wanted to make sure that some of the grid was still visible, so I'm not going all the way across the page, just partially across the page. And then with the Dilutions journal, I'm covering up most of it and just leaving a bit of a painted edge just on the sides there. And I'm also not blending the paint into each other that well. I definitely could have blended it in more, and it was difficult to blend in on the Dilutions journal just because of the paper type that it is. The text paper that's in my junk journal here is very, very slick. It's very shiny and slick, and so it was blending in beautifully. It worked out quite well, actually. And I still wanted to be able to see some of the text through it, even though I was using some darker colours. So then I'm almost done here. I hope you can't hear the birds on the deck. It's springtime as I'm recording this, and we have a family of minor birds, and if you're Australian, you'll know the joys of minor birds and how freaking annoying and what a pest they are. I love animals, but minor birds are destroying a lot of our native birds' homes and kicking them out. So I'm not a fan of them. And there's two that have called our back deck their mansion. It's their home. And I don't know how to get rid of them and move them on to another location. We've tried snakes. You might have seen in my Insta story, we had some fake snakes out on the deck because my dad had used that for some at his place and it scared them away and they went somewhere else. However, our minor birds are quite ballsy and decided to befriend the snakes and like to sit on top of them. So that's not going to work. If you've got any bird deterrent tips, let me know. So then I used, back on track with the layout, I used a glue stick to glue this last down. The reason why I used a glue stick is because I didn't want to put matte gel medium all over my page. I knew that I was going to do some writing on that left-hand top corner where the graph paper was poking out. And so I wanted to leave the paper as papery as possible, if that makes sense, without having to write on top of a medium. So that's why I went with glue stick. And then I accidentally exploded my glue, surprise, surprise, all over a star. And so I'm just dipping my finger into it and dispersing the glue appropriately over all of the other stars so that I didn't have a mountainous glue mound on the back of this one and have it oozing out everywhere. So of course, like I said, I have way too many stars. So what I was trying to do was to stick the big ones down first, of course, because it's much easier to squeeze in the smaller ones later on than the larger ones. And I'm roughly trying to match up the colours, so putting the blues with the blue paint, the purples with the purple paint, and so on. And then I just wanted to put a couple over here. I was careful not to put any on the spine of this page just because the stars are on such a thick watercolour paper. I knew that they weren't going to agree with being folded in half when this journal's closed. And so I made sure to avoid that. So just adding the final little stars in here, and then I did give it a quick little blast with my heat gun because it was very, very gluey and my arm kept getting stuck in the glue. I'm using my Artline felt tip pen today because the day that I filmed this, I filmed several videos all using this felt tip pen. Must have been within arm's reach, and I really like it. It's a lovely pen to journal with. It's what I've always used when I was younger, and so it's an old familiar friend, and it's an old faithful. Let me know in the comments, what's your old faithful stationery products? Is there a pen that you always go back to that you know you can rely on if you find it? Mine is definitely this Artline felt tip pen. So I wrote my quote down there, and then I felt like I needed a pop of white to go with the white outlines on the stars. And then, of course, currently obsessed with little doodly bits and pieces. And so I feel like this actually really made the page, I should say the spread, pop. Just by adding that little bit of white, it just, I don't know, it brought something different to the page and brightened it up a little bit, and also made the white space, even though it's not actual white space, this top left hand corner, because I have written the quote over the top of it, but it kind of is white space because the text doesn't take up a lot of heaviness on the eye, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So the white, I think, really just makes it all come together. So this is the art journal spread, and you'll see in a moment I grabbed the layout to show you how I got inspiration, and I Inkie lifted it, and I kind of turned it upside down, the layout, because except for the direction of colours, I felt like my focal image was to the left, and my text was up in that top corner, so you can see where my title is on the layout. That's where I've put my quote, and then my stars kind of sprinkled diagonally up the right hand side. So that was where I got my inspiration from, and there's my background that will be waiting for me next time in a future video. And then it was time to start the second layout. So this is a photo of Archie, aka Mr. Buckethead, and he went through this stage where he was just obsessed with putting this bucket on his head and running back and forth, laughing his head off. He thought it was the funniest thing in the world, and so I wanted to make sure that I documented him being a bit of a twit. And I thought, what better way to do that than with some rainbow stars, because the rainbow stars are a bit wild and bright and wacky, just like he is. And I knew that I had a lot of yellow stars left over, and it would pick up the bright yellow colour of the bucket. So I'm adding the photos just to some white cardstock and backing those. And I've pulled this paper out so many times recently to do layouts with, and I keep putting it back because it is, even though it's just black and white, it's very, very busy. It's very bold, and I keep putting it back. But I thought it went with this page because I talk about how obsessed he is with this bucket head routine. And he was doing it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He was doing it every day of the week. So I thought that worked out quite well. This rainbow piece is actually the backing paper for some thickers that I bought. And so I put it in my scraps of scrapbooking paper drawer, and because I knew I'd be able to use it for something at some point. So this shows that even if you are getting inspiration from a layout or an art journal page that has a painted or a mixed media background, you can always see if you have a paper that mimics the same kind of style or the same feel to the paper. You can see that this looks very brush strokey, and even though it's not the exact same rainbow order that I had with the other one, it's still it's a similar thing, and so it works. Adding some tissue paper and cutting that off. I really need to unglue my scissors. They are so sticky at the moment, but it's one of those jobs that I always forget about until I'm in the thick of using the said scissors with something, and I don't think about it when I'm finished scrapping for the day. I always just think about it mid-project. So I'm sticking these two photos down, and I wanted to put one overlapping the rainbow paper just to tie it in with the background a little bit more. And then I thought I'd put the smaller photo up the top because the larger photo is heavier, it's bigger, so it takes a little bit more weight of the layout. So then it's time to glue all of the stars down, and I tried to stick to the same kind of color scheme that I went with the other one, with the yellows at the top, and then working my way down to the other colors down the bottom. I decided to go, this layout kind of called for a bit of a diagonal to go in between the gaps of those two photos. So I'm just sticking all of these bits down. At this point, I was also trying to figure out where my title was going to go, which I should have worked out. Yes, there we go. I should have started putting my title down before I even started gluing the stars, but I didn't. But it's okay. Luckily, I remembered before I got too far in the layout, and I've decided to call this one Total Dingleberry, because we call Archie a dingleberry, which means, like, I don't know if it's a real word, but it's in our heads it kind of means like a silly duffer, like a silly Billy, and so we call him a dingleberry. And this is just the definition in pictures of what a dingleberry behaves like. Total goofball. And I knew that at some point I wanted to do a layout called this. I think there was actually, I mentioned it in a video, and someone else used the word dingleberry with their child as well. Let me know if that was you, that we're not the only ones, because I'm sure I've heard it somewhere else as well. I don't know where it started, but yeah, we call him a dingleberry, or a bit of a dingus, for short. And I think sometimes at little school he might say to his teachers that he's being a dingleberry and laugh his head off. I don't know if they know what on earth he's talking about, but I've heard him say it to one of his fave daycare teachers before, and she just laughed, I think, because he was cracking himself up when he was telling her about it. But yes, adding these little stars down here, and I still have some left over. I had 3 left over, and I think you'll see next month, if my planning's going correctly, there is a scrapbook layout, a junk journal page where I try to use those final stars, and they don't get on there either. They'll get used eventually. They get put in my little embellishment bowl on my desk, and they'll get used eventually. I'm adding a little bit of journaling down here. I wanted to make sure, because this page is so bold and in your face with those stars, I did want to have a little bit of blank space in that bottom left hand corner, just so that it wasn't too overpowering and there wasn't too much going on. And I think when you're working with a smaller sized layout, so this is a 6x12, of course, it's tricky sometimes to have empty space, especially if you're working with a multiple photo layout. Not that these are big photos, but it's still, it makes a difference when there's more than one photo and you've only got a tiny bit of space to work with. I've been trying to use up some enamel dots recently, and I thought that this would be a good opportunity to use some of these ones, because all of these colours are on the page, especially the bigger dots. I really just want a pack of enamel dots. It's just the teeny tiny ones. It's just teeny tiny, and maybe the medium sized, maybe. But I rarely use the larger ones, and so when I have a layout like this that has a lot going on, I like to try and sneak the bigger ones in there as well to give it a bit of texture, but also to use them up and actually get them on a page and out of my stash. I had these matte purple ones that were really pretty as well, and because we've talked about purple being the Voldemort of the scrapbooking world, it's just colour that scrapbookers just sometimes don't acknowledge. We just pretend purple's not there, just pretend it's not there. Whenever I can use purple enamel dots and purple embellishments, I try to get them on the page, because it isn't a go-to colour for me, or just scrapbooking in general. I will admit, over the last, I'd say, year and a half, it has popped up a whole lot more than it has in the previous several years, but it's still not a main colour, and I don't quite get why, but obviously the companies that make all the things must have a reason. So then I'm snipping off all the bits. I love to overlap stuff off the edge. I just really like the look of it. I tried to cut this enamel dot and it just wasn't working, and this probably isn't safe, so I wouldn't suggest doing this with giant scissors. And in the end, I just slide it further back into the layout so I don't have to cut it. But I love the way this one turned out. It was a twist on the stars of the first one, because all of the stars on the first one were together, whereas here they were separated into 3 different sections, which was really fun. I'm just going to let you in on a secret here, peeps. You know my woes when it comes to recording voiceovers. Today we're competing with all the things. We've got the minor birds that are declaring war on our back deck in their loudest voices. I've got someone using a chainsaw out the back, and we've got construction in our street at the same time. Really hoping my microphone isn't picking up any 3 of those things. If it has, I'm very sorry. They haven't been all morning, of course, but as soon as I start a voiceover, that's when all of the noises start happening. Thanks for watching today. I will have another scrapbook video for you in the new year. I love this idea of taking inspiration from a layout and translating it to an art journal page for something a bit different. All right, peeps, have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.